or over the weekend. So happy to be here with you on the first Monday of the month for another Marine Mammal Monday. And today we have a very special theme, kind of moving out of spooky season into Thanksgiving season. We're going to be talking about an ocean feast. So, with Thanksgiving coming up at the end of this month, we're going to be celebrating all of the different hunting and feeding strategies of marine mammals today. So, we've got a really fun program lined up for you. And I'm very excited and honored and pleased to announce that this Marine Mammal Monday today is brought to you in part by a contributing sponsor, Pet Emergency and Specialty Center of Marin. So thank you so much, Pet Emergency and Specialty Center of Marin, for sponsoring today's Marine Mammal Monday. We're so happy and thankful that you're supporting our mission to rescue, rehabilitate, research, and release hundreds of marine mammals, as well as educate our wonderful public. So, thank you so much. I'm going to give it a couple minutes here before we jump in, but if you're just joining us, you're in the right place for Marine Mammal Monday. And in the spirit of Thanksgiving coming up later this month, we're going to be talking all about the different hunting and feeding strategies of marine mammals. So, an ocean feast, so to speak. So, if you're tuning in today, I would love for you to leave us a comment for where you are. Where are you tuning in from? I'm here in San Francisco today. We have kind of a drizzly, gloomy day, but a perfect day to stay inside and chat and talk about marine mammals. Where are you located, Diane?
Hey everyone, so I'm located in Half Moon Bay, and it's also pretty gloomy out here. It's not raining though, which is nice.
That's nice. Still nice to be cozy inside anyway. Well, welcome. So drop us a comment. Let us know where you're tuning in from today. I see Anshika is joining us. She's tuning in from San Diego. Hi, Anshika. So good to see you again. And feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from. Hopefully, everyone's staying dry and warm on this wonderful Monday. And I see that it is 4 o'clock already. So I'm going to get us started, get us jumping in. I do see that we have Rocio from Ithaca, New York. Welcome. Barbara from Thousand Oaks, California. Welcome, Barbara. And keep letting me know where you're tuning in from in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and jump in for today. So, if this is your first Marine Mammal Monday, hello, nice to meet you. My name is Laura Gill. I'm our Community Engagement Manager at the center. So, I have the pleasure of overseeing our public programs and outreach along our California coast and Hawaii response range. And I'm joined today by Diane. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Diane Hardy. I'm the Education Volunteer Coordinator at the center. I've been working there for over 4 years now, and I work really closely with Laura and manage our wonderful team of education volunteers.
Thanks so much, Diane. And a big thank you to Katie, who is going to be helping manage our comments. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them into the comments there and we'll try and answer them live. And if we don't get to them live, then Katie will be sure to respond back with your answers. So thank you so much for joining, everyone. I see we got some more people joining us. We have Lisa from San Antonio, Texas. Welcome, Lisa. We have Diane, another Diane, joining us from San Simeon. Welcome. We have Pam from Charleston, South Carolina, and Audrey from Sacramento. Welcome. All right. So, if this is your first Marine Mammal Monday, I always like to kick us off with just a quick introduction about the Marine Mammal Center. So, we are, in fact, the world's largest marine mammal hospital and education facility. And what that means is by the number of patients that we rescue, as well as our rescue range, that makes us the largest in our facility, the size of our facility. So you're actually seeing a bird's eye view of our main hospital located in Sausalito, California. And we're basically rescuing, rehabilitating, researching, and releasing any sick or injured marine mammals. So that's things like seals, sea lions, whales, and dolphins along California coast, rescuing them, bringing them into our hospital, getting them better, and then returning them to their ocean home. We're completely nonprofit, so we are mostly run by generous donations from individuals. And that means that we also have a passionate and dedicated volunteer force. So we have close to 1,300 volunteers that donate their time to help us with this work. We in California are responding to 600 miles of California coastlines. You can call us if you see a marine mammal as far south as San Luis Obispo and as far north as Mendocino County. And we also have a hospital out in Hawaii, on the big island of Hawaii, called Keikaiola, where we're working exclusively with the endangered Hawaiian monk seal. So we have quite the range. Now, every single patient story, though, kind of begins the same way. It starts with a phone call to our 24-hour hotline. So here in California, that's 415-289 SEAL. So it's easy to remember. And you can call and report any sick or injured marine mammal. And then we'll send out a highly trained team of volunteers, like you see pictured here in the top left corner, to actually go out to where that animal is. They'll do an assessment to see if that marine mammal does need rescue. And if it does, then we'll transport it to our hospital up in Sausalito. So you're seeing some of those volunteers pictured with their protective gear, like these wooden shields. They might use things like a net to help capture that marine mammal. And eventually we load them into a crate or a carrier, much like you would for your pet, cat, or dog at home, only ours are quite a bit bigger for those seals and sea lions. And then we'll put them on the back of our Ford F-150 trucks and drive them to our hospital. Once they are on site at the hospital, we have our volunteers, veterinarians, dedicated staff that are going to help diagnose that patient and see what's wrong with them and come up with the proper treatment plan. So, essentially, anything that could be done at a human hospital, we could actually do for marine mammals as well. So, in the top right, you're seeing a sea otter that's receiving an ultrasound here in this image. And along the way, we're doing our research. We want to understand not only how marine mammals are getting sick, but we also want to know how we can also innovate marine mammal medicine, how we can create healthier habitats for marine mammals to go back to. So, we do quite a bit of research at the center, as well as inviting experts from all over the world to work with us. And the ultimate goal, of course, is release. We want these marine mammals to go happy and healthy back to their ocean home. So, pictured in the bottom right, you're seeing some chubby harbor seals that were successfully rehabilitated and being released back out to the ocean. And then what Diane and I spend our time doing is this educational piece. We can rescue marine mammals all day, every day, but if we're not sharing the stories of these animals, then we're not going to have as great of an impact as we could. So we do a lot of work at the center to share activities. We have virtual programs. We even have curriculum available for teachers through our website, marinemammalcenter.org. If you haven't yet, be sure to check out all of our wonderful online resources. It's also a great option right now since the center is closed to the public for some renovations. You can still stay connected with us virtually. Or if you're not located in California, you can also connect with us virtually that way. So while the center is closed right now for renovations, we're still a functioning hospital taking in any seals and sea lions that are in need. So we do have about 21 patients in our care right now, including different types of fur seals. We've got a handful of California sea lions, some elephant seals, and we even have a sea otter that we're caring for right now. So make sure to check out our website to learn more about those patients we have right now. All right. So without further ado, it's time to eat. Time for an ocean feast. In the spirit of Thanksgiving today, we wanted to talk about all of the amazing feeding and hunting strategies of marine mammals. So we're going to cover a couple from seals to sea lions to whales. We'll try and cover as many as we can. But we're going to start first with my personal favorite, the California sea lion. And this also happens to be the most common patient that we have at the Marine Mammal Center, meaning that we see them basically year round. And you saw just now that we have about 6 on site at our hospital that we're caring for today. But we really see the majority of them in the summertime. So they are the most common patient at the Marine Mammal Center. And they're a really interesting animal to talk about when we're thinking about feasting and hunting strategies and feeding, because they have a really unique approach and different adaptations for eating. So before we kind of get into that, I'm curious to know, leave me a comment. What is a sea lion's diet? What do sea lions like to eat? Now, if you're not familiar with sea lions, there's kind of a clue up here. I have pictured the skull of an adult California sea lion. And if you're looking at the skull, you might be able to pick up some clues of what they eat. They have these sharp, pointed teeth. They have these really large jaws. So let me know in the comments what you think a sea lion's diet is. What do they eat? And I see Amanda has guessed herring. That's an excellent guess. I certainly would eat herring. Azul is guessing fish, which is a good guess and a safe guess. Fish in general is a good one. Any other guesses? What do sea lions eat? Feel free to let me know in the comments what you think, either based on what you already know about sea lions or marine mammals, or even just the clues that you're picking up from looking at the skull and jaw of a California sea lion. So I'll give you a second to keep guessing. Azul's guessing clams or shellfish. That's an interesting guess. And while there are lots of clams and shellfish in the San Francisco Bay Area along the Pacific coast, it's not a primary diet or a prey item in the sea lion's diet. Sarah is guessing sardines. Excellent guess. Those small schooling fish like sardines and herring. Sea lions will definitely eat those. So we had a lot of good guesses, and we covered some of these groups. So certainly those small fish like sardines, anchovies, herring are a regular staple in a sea lion's diet. But even those larger fish, so things like salmon would be part of a sea lion's diet. Some of the stranger marine creatures like octopus and squid are part of the sea lion's diet. And one of the prey items that I love to share are even small sharks. Like pictured here is a leopard shark that you can find along California coast. And they get about 6 feet long. So they're a pretty decent sized, smaller shark. But compared to an adult California sea lion that could get up to over 700 pounds, they could easily take down something like that leopard shark there, or even things like stingrays here in San Francisco Bay. We have bat rays that they might decide to munch on. So, really, a sea lion's diet, as you can see, is very diverse. They are called opportunistic feeders because truly they'll eat whatever they can get their flippers on. Fish, octopus, squid, sharks, rays, all of that yummy prey. Now, I'll also point out that if you're looking at the picture of the skull of this sea lion here, I mentioned that they have these sharp pointed teeth, and actually they lack molars like a sea otter or even like us. They don't have those flat molars that are used for chewing. So instead, California sea lions are using these sharp teeth to grab and bite prey, and they might do things like thrash to break prey into smaller pieces if they're going for something larger. But really they're just going to use those teeth to grab and swallow. They're not going to be chewing their food. Additionally, looking at the skull and jaws, you can see there's a lot of extra surface area around the jaws and the skull. And that's just extra places where muscle can attach. So, sea lions have a very strong bite force because they have all of this muscle around their jaw to help them really get a good, strong bite. Now, in addition to the jaw and skull of a California sea lion, they also, of course, have other really amazing adaptations to cope with hunting in their ocean environment. So I love this photo because it points out all of these highly studied scientific adaptations in very relatable ways. So, for example, at the top here, we have Shrek floppy flaps, which are the external ear flaps. So, sea lions do have a good sense of hearing, even underwater. They have that kind of directional hearing. They can tell if something's coming from the right or the left. Then they have their featherless water wings or their flippers, which help them swim in fast bursts. So they can swim up to 20 miles per hour using those really strong front flippers. And then they have things like the heart shaped boopable snoot or their nose. They do have a good sense of smell, which they would obviously use above water. And then finally, the face fingers here, which are their whiskers, or we also call them vibrissae. And these whiskers have nerve endings that go all the way to the end of the whisker, so they can actually sense vibrations in the water around them if they're in a very low light condition, for example. And then what's not pointed out here, but what I'll share very quickly, is their eyesight. So sea lions can see pretty well above water and underneath water, and they can actually differentiate a lot of different colors in the blue and green color spectrum, probably because they live underwater mostly, and those are a lot of the colors that they're seeing. So they've got that good eyesight. And additionally, their eyes have a specialized organ at the back of their eye called a tapetum lucidum, which is kind of like having a mirror at the back of your eye so that the light that comes in is reflected and they can see better in low light conditions. It's a similar organ that you find in your cat at home or your dog. If you've ever taken a picture of them in the dark and their eyes look like they're glowing back at you in the picture, that is that reflective organ, the tapetum lucidum at the back of the eye. So at the Marine Mammal Center, our sea lions and all of our patients are eating herring. Someone earlier had guessed that herring was one of their primary prey items, which it is. And while they have a lot of different prey that we could feed them, we choose to feed them Alaskan herring because we get it from a sustainable source, or a source that it's not damaging the environment where the herring are being fished, and it's also not overfishing that population of herring. They have enough time to repopulate as we fish. So they're sustainably sourced. But you can imagine that with so many patients in our care at the center, and each patient having a unique diet plan that's decided by our veterinarians, we wouldn't be able to have a huge aquarium of live herring swimming around to be able to feed our patients. So instead, we get it in big frozen blocks, like what you see pictured here on this table. And once we have these big frozen blocks of herring, when it's time to feed, we'll defrost these fish blocks and we'll sort out the best fish. We want the whole ones that are healthy and big. And then we'll weigh them out into specific buckets for each patient depending on their diet. And again, it's our veterinarians that get to decide when patients eat and how often they eat and how much they eat. So we'll weigh out these buckets and then we'll do something called a free feeding, where we'll take that bucket of fish and we'll toss it into the pool with the patient that we're trying to feed. Now, in the ideal scenario, there would be multiple sea lions in the same pool being rehabilitated so that as we do this free feeding, they can actually compete for that food. And that's a really important skill for when they're released back to the ocean. We want to make sure they have that competitive nature so that they're able to catch their food and thrive when they're released eventually back to the ocean. So I actually have a video of what this looks like, and I'll share with you now. Apologies in advance if you get any glitches, but this is what it looks like to do a free feeding with sea lions. So you'll see that volunteer tossed the bucket of fish into the pool, and now you're seeing multiple sea lions competing for that food. And you can also see how they're not necessarily chewing that fish, but they're using those powerful jaws and sharp teeth to grab the fish and then kind of swallow it whole. And then you may have also seen at the end of the video there that one of the sea lions basically was trying to steal a fish right out of the mouth of another sea lion in that pool, which is terrible table manners. I definitely don't recommend doing that at the Thanksgiving dinner table this year. But it's a great example of that competitive nature. That's going to be a sea lion that is going to thrive and survive once it's released back out to the ocean. All right. Now, unfortunately, though, sometimes it's the food that our patients are eating that actually makes them sick and brings them to our hospital. So, for example, when ocean conditions change, if it gets too warm in the water, or if there's more acidic water, or things like agricultural runoff in the water, it can sometimes cause things like algae or tiny plant plankton to bloom. And that's not necessarily always a bad thing, except that there are harmful algae or toxic algae. And in that case, when it's a toxic algae bloom or a harmful algal bloom, then it can cause damage to the marine mammals in that environment. So, here on the California coast, there is an algae that produces a toxin called domoic acid. And when this algae blooms, there's more of that toxin in the water. And those small fish, like the sardines, the herring that we were talking about, anchovies, when they're eating things like that plankton, that algae, then they naturally would start to accumulate that toxin. And then when something like a sea lion then eats that fish, they also start to accumulate that toxin. So it builds up in the food web in this way, and we call it bioaccumulation when that happens. So, when we see this domoic acid toxicity in our patients, like California sea lions, because it's a neurotoxin, it can affect their brain. So, they may become disoriented, or they may start to even have things like seizures, or in really severe cases, it could even cause things like brain damage and even weaken the heart. So that was the case for a sea lion that we rescued earlier this year named Babka, who is a California sea lion, a juvenile male that was rescued a little further south from here in Monterey, California. And there was a family walking by on Seaside Beach, and they saw a sea lion that was acting unusually. He was kind of weaving his head. It looked like maybe he was having seizures, but thankfully they knew to call the Marine Mammal Center. So they called and reported Bobka to us, and we sent out our team of rescue volunteers to go and check him out. And as it turned out, because of that unusual behavior, we did bring him back to our hospital. And once here, our veterinarians determined that he did, in fact, have that domoic acid toxicity. He was sick from that harmful algae. And he was also malnourished. He was only 133 pounds when a juvenile male between 2 to 4 years old should be closer to a couple hundred pounds. So he's underweight and he had this toxicity. Now, thankfully, this neurotoxin is actually water soluble. So that means if we can flush it out of the system with lots of fluids, then we can cure this toxicity. So that's what we did for Bobka. We flushed his system. We gave him lots of good fluids to get that toxin out. We also gave him healthy herring to eat so that he wasn't eating more of that toxic fish. And eventually, after just a few short weeks, he was able to be returned to his ocean home. So here's Bobka being released back out to the ocean. Now, in another part of the treatment as well, if in addition to flushing out the toxin, if it had caused things like seizures, for example, we can also give anti seizure medication, just like you would in a person, to these marine mammals. So, lots of treatment options. And thankfully, this is a treatable toxin. So I'll hand it over to Diane now to share a little bit more about some of our other marine mammal feeding and hunting strategies.
Thank you, Laura. So, next, we're going to talk about southern sea otters, who have quite a different way of eating and feasting that California sea lions do. But first, a few cool facts about sea otters, since they do break a few records. Um, they are actually the furriest animals in the world. I love this picture of a sea otter pup because it is the fluffiest thing I've ever seen. But sea otters have over 1 million hairs per square inch. So if you put a quarter on the fur of this otter pup, there would be 1 million hairs within that area. And fur is actually really important adaptation for sea otters. So unlike seals and sea lions, they don't have that nice thick layer of blubber or fat to keep them warm in the water. So they rely on their fur to keep them warm. And they actually have to pretty constantly groom it and trap air within their fur. And that prevents their skin from actually getting wet when they're diving in cold, cold Monterey waters when they're hunting for food. And then sea otters also happen to be the smallest of the marine mammals. So over here we've got all of the California species of marine mammals, ones that you might have seen if you're on the West Coast. So we've got some of the largest ones, the whales, and then near the top you'll see some of our the California sea lions that Laura was just talking about, some other of our fur seal and seal species, and then up there on the left is the tiny, tiny, lonely sea otter. So even though they look quite similar to some of our marine mammals, they are actually more closely related to weasels. So that's a fun fact. Um, so in the comments, before I tell you about what sea otters eat and how they do it, what do you think? Let us know in the comments what you think are sea otters' favorite foods. And I'll give you a hint. They actually have pretty powerful molars. So, unlike the California sea lions, they do have molars, pretty large molars. That's their back teeth.
That's a good clue, I feel like. Molars should
Hmm.
mean something.
Yes, if you were listening to what Laura was saying. All right, we've got Pam guessing scallops, and Azul guessing shellfish, small squid, fish, mussels, clams. Nice variety, mussels. All right. Some great guesses in here. Oysters. All right. Well, you were mostly right. So, sea otters love eating shelled food, shellfish like clam, mussels. They also like spiky food like sea urchins that you can see here on the right. They'll also eat shrimp when they're under our care. And then in the wilds, they'll also eat crabs. So, what all those foods have in common is that they are incredibly hard to get to. It's they all these organisms have hard shells on their exterior. And even though sea otters do have some pretty powerful molars to help them through, they also use tools, which makes sea otters one of only a few animals in the world to use tools. Um, and one of them being humans, of course. So they'll actually use rocks as anvils to help them crack open shellfish or sea urchins, like you can see in this picture. So I'll show you a quick video next to show you how exactly they do that.
They're also brilliant tool users, cracking open their prey's shell by banging it against a flat stone on their stomach. A clever way of getting past those sharp spines, munching on its protein-rich innards.
I love seeing them in action. They've got quite the arm strength. And you'll notice that sea otters, unlike seals and sea lions, they don't have flippers. They actually have pretty dexterous hands that helps them use these tools and open up their food. So pretty amazing. So there's lots of sea otters around the world, but in California, the ones that we see are the southern sea otters. And southern sea otters, back, a couple hundred years ago, they actually used to be seen all along the California coast. But they used to be hunted for a long time for their nice thick fur. And unfortunately, that really brought down their population numbers. And their population still hasn't recovered. They are a threatened species. And there's only about 3,500 of them left in the wild. And they're only found in this area on the map between Big Sur and around Big Sur and Monterey Bay. And sea otters are actually a really important part of the ecosystem. So I talked about their favorite foods being urchins, and sea otters are actually a really important animal to make sure that kelp forests remain healthy because sea urchins like to eat kelp. And sea otters who eat a lot of urchins actually help keep the urchin population in check so that the urchins don't take over and start eating all the kelp. And without the kelp, you get rid of that nice environment that is great for fish to swim in, for harbor seals, all these different types of marine life that really thrive in these environments. And so, in those areas where sea otters are no longer are, there's some areas where urchins have completely taken over, and they're called urchin barrens, and that's what you can see on the right in the picture there. So at the Marine Mammal Center, we've actually we've been taking in and responding to southern sea otters since we opened our doors in 1975. And since then, we've responded to about 500 sea otters along our range. And we actually work very closely with Monterey Bay Aquarium. So if you've ever been to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, you might be familiar with their sea otter pup program. So they'll pair abandoned sea otter pups that we might respond to in the wild and pair them up with surrogate mothers. And these are all sea otters that can no longer be released to the wild. And those adult female otters will adopt those pups and show them the ropes for how to be a sea otter. So they can learn how to dive, how to groom their fur, and how to use tools to open up food so they can thrive in the wild. Um, but at the Marine Mammal Center, we don't have that same equipment, so we specialize in taking care of juvenile and adult sea otters. So we have specialized pens with reinforced fiberglass walls and locks on the grates because sea otters have pretty dexterous hands, as we explained, and they can be quite the escape artists. But right now, we actually have a sea otter patient on site at the Marine Mammal Center. His name is Spinny. He is a juvenile male who was rescued in late summer for being very malnourished, but also because he had some shark bite wounds on him. And before I tell you more about Spinny, I actually have a little trivia question to see if you know. Um, but do you think sea otters are part of a great white shark's diets? Is this true or false? That sea otters are part of great white shark's diets, which are the bites that Spinny likely got. So we got Azul saying false, another false. All right. Got a few falses. Let's reveal the answer. So you are in fact right. Sea otters are not technically part of a great white shark's diets, but what is happening is where most of the sea otter populations are in Monterey and those kelp forests is also where a lot of juvenile white sharks have been moving up recently, and where they're making at that age, white sharks are making the transition from eating fish to eating larger species like marine mammals. And the marine mammals that sharks like to eat are seals and sea lions because they're nice and fatty, very nutritious source of food. And when they're learning how to hunt, they're looking for that general shape, and sea otters can sometimes look a little bit like seals. And sharks will actually take test bites before they really eat an animal. And usually, when they take the test bite out of the otter, they realize really quickly that it's actually just a big ball of fur and there's not a whole lot of blubber in there. So they usually spit them out. But it can leave sea otters pretty injured and lead to ones that end up at the Marine Mammal Center, like Spinny. And so Spinny, we took him in, treated him for his wounds, made sure that they weren't getting infected. But because of his wounds, those prevented him from grooming his fur properly. So when we first rescued him, he was really struggling to stay warm. And at the Marine Mammal Center, we actually have just got this new area, especially for sea otters, called the Sea Otter Tote, which allows us to provide warmer waters for sea otters like Spinny, who might need a little bit more help in staying warm. So we kept him in that area that was nice and dry and separate from the noise of the other pens. And he's now doing much better. He actually is grooming his fur beautifully now, and he's getting some nice, sustainable crab and other types of seafood. He's actually pretty picky, so he gets a whole variety of things like clams and shrimp and mussels provided to him. And he should be ready to get released back to the wild pretty soon, hopefully. He's been gaining a good amount of weight. So, very, very good to see Spinny's progress.
Only the finest for our patients.
Yes, only the finest. And on that note, actually, so Laura mentioned that for California sea lions, we provide them with sustainable herring from Alaska. And for sea otters, we also choose sustainable seafood. So we make sure all their crab and shrimp and clam is coming from a sustainable source. And we partner closely with Monterey Bay Aquarium's Seafood Watch program to choose our seafood. And this is something that's actually available to everyone. You can go to their website, seafoodwatch.org, to see recommendations for your favorite types of seafoods. And they'll give a rating per type of fish, depending on where it's coming from. And you want to stay within the green or yellow, so the good choices and the acceptable ones, and then avoid anything that is on the red list. Those are the avoids.
Wonderful. So we got to hear a little bit more about the diet and feeding strategies of the sea otters using rocks as anvils to crush open those spiky urchins. We talked about the sea lions, which have a lot of really interesting physical adaptations and hunting strategy. But we can't talk about an ocean feast without talking about the largest of the marine mammals, the whales. So here I have pictured a humpback whale on the right next to its one of its favorite foods. But when we think about whales, there are two different groups. We have our toothed whales, which have teeth like beluga whales or sperm whales. And then you have things like the humpback whale pictured here, which are baleen whales. So instead of having a set of teeth like we do or those toothed whales, they have these bristle like baleen plates that hang down from the top of their mouth. And these baleen plates are actually made out of keratin, just like our hair and fingernails. And it acts as a filter feeding device for these baleen whales, where they'll use that to filter out tiny animal plankton, like what's pictured here, that krill, or even small fish, small schooling fish like sardines and anchovy or herring, like we've been talking about today. But I think what's one of the most amazing things about baleen whales is that the blue whale, in particular, which is the largest baleen whale, but also the biggest animal to ever live on planet Earth, will feed on the smallest animal on planet Earth, those tiny animal plankton or that krill. So the baleen whale or the blue whale strategy is to have baleen instead of teeth, but also just to eat literal tons of that krill to sustain them and that huge size. So the blue whale can get up to 100 feet long and can weigh almost 400,000 pounds. They're a massive, massive animal that eats the tiniest animal. Now, then when we compare that to the humpback whale, which is about half the size of the blue whale, about 50 feet in length, and just one of their flippers could be as long as 15 feet. They also are using that baleen as their feeding strategy, but they have really unique hunting strategies for how they're going to eat things like krill and smaller fish. So, what the humpback whales do is they do something called bubble netting. And that's when a whale or a group of whales will swim in a circular pattern at the depths of the water, and they'll swim around schooling fish like sardines or anchovies. And as they're swimming in this circular pattern, they'll actually release air from their blowhole and it creates bubbles. And as those bubbles travel to the surface of the water, it creates almost a wall that's then surrounding those schooling fish. So the humpback whales can then come in from underneath and open their huge mouths with all of those pleats underneath their lower jaw. They can open, take a big gulp of that water that also then will have lots of little sardines and anchovies in that water. And then they'll take their big tongues, they'll push out the excess water and strain out the water, leaving behind just that yummy fish that they're trying to eat. And they can take that massive tongue and slurp it all down. So, this is a really interesting and unique hunting strategy that humpback whales have adapted to using. Not all whales do this bubble netting technique. It's unique to these humpback whales. So we talked about the baleen whales. Let's talk now. I'll hand it over to Diane to talk about the toothed whales.
Thank you, Laura. So, toothed whales have a really interesting adaptation. So, they don't have baleens, they have sharp teeth. But to locate food, they have this, they use something called echolocation. So, what they'll do is they'll send very high frequency clicks or sounds in the water, and those sounds will bounce off moving objects like prey. And the sound will bounce back towards the dolphins or toothed whales' head and go through this fat-filled cavity in their lower jawbone. And that'll kind of paint a picture in their head of where the prey is, what size it is, and it makes them really good hunters, even in very dark places, because some of the toothed whales can dive pretty far down, like sperm whales. But wanted to talk really quickly about actually another toothed whale species that uses a really similar technique to the bubble nets that Laura was just talking about. So these are bottlenose dolphins in Florida. And what they do is they'll collaborate, hunt in groups to catch fish. And the way they do this is they'll send one of the dolphins will locate they'll locate a school of fish, and one dolphin will swim around really quickly and tap its tail fin on the ground, creating these temporary mud plumes, and those will create a temporary net for the fish. And the fish usually they become really disoriented and start jumping out of the water, making it really easy for the dolphins to catch, as you can see in this video. The dolphins look so ecstatic to be catching all these fish. So, quite an ingenious strategy, and really cool to see really similar hunting strategies being developed across different species that live in different places.
Imagine if that's how we had to eat Thanksgiving dinner, just throwing turkey legs at each other to catch.
Yes, a lot of work, but it does look like fun.
It's true.
Um, And of course, we couldn't end this presentation without talking one of the largest marine mammal predators and most successful one, the orcas, who have really, really interesting hunting strategies that actually differ across different groups. So, orcas are also known as killer whales, and they're very recognizable with their distinct coloration. So, that kind of black with some white spots, their really large dorsal fin. And they're one of the larger toothed whales, so the largest of the dolphins, I believe, but not quite as large as the sperm whales. And they are incredibly great hunters. So there's also many different types of orcas around the world, and those are called they're called different ecotypes. And you can see in this picture all the different ones that you can find across the globe. They look very similar to the untrained eye. Honestly, I couldn't tell you why some of these are different. But what's really interesting, these different ecotypes typically have preferred food and very specific hunting strategies that they've developed for their food of preference. And so the resident killer whales, for example, in Seattle, specialize in eating salmon. And that's mostly what their diet is made up of. Whereas the transient killer whales in that same area behave very differently. They actually go after marine mammals like gray whales or seals and sea lions, and so have different techniques that they'll use. And then the killer whales that we're going to talk about today are the ones in Antarctica that hunt seals, and they actually have a really interesting strategy they'll use that I'll talk about in just a little bit. So orcas, they have different strategies across the world for because these hunting strategies are typically passed down within different groups called pods. So in orcas, they're an incredibly social species. They travel in these pods that are usually led by females. And orcas being incredibly long lived, they can live 80 to 90 years. And they will pass down skills from generation to generation. And that's why different groups have formed different cultures. Some orcapods even have different cliques for communication. So they each have their own language and hunting strategies that they've honed for years and years and been able to improve upon generation. And the way they communicate is through clicks as well. So different clicks from the ones they use to echolocate. So the orcas I was talking about, the ones in Antarctica, their hunting strategy is to work together really silently. So they'll all like just skim the surface and dive down at the same time and create a huge wave to wash these seals off of ice that is floating in the ocean. And that makes the seal then very accessible for the orcas to then grab it and eat it. And I'm going to show you a video in just a second about orcas learning to do that. So disclaimer that no seals were harmed in this video because the orcas were just practicing. They were showing some of the younger members how to carry out this specific hunting strategy. So do not worry, no seals were harmed. So you can see the orcas, they just located the seal, and now they're about to go in and create that big wave that is powerful enough to rock that ice and knock the seal off of it. So very, very cool hunting strategy, very successful. And actually, orcas are, I believe, the world's most successful predators. So most of the hunts they attempt are successful. And it is no surprise because they have such specific hunting strategies and they can communicate to each other about how to do it all. So we talked a lot about fish today and how different marine mammals like to catch it. And we mentioned that at the Marine Mammal Center, we make sure to choose sustainable seafood, and that's in order for us to ensure that the marine mammals in the wilds, or the ones that the patients that we send back to the ocean, have enough to eat when they go back out there. And because unfortunately about 85% of our fisheries are caught at or above capacity right now. So fish are unfortunately disappearing at a pretty quick rate. Um, and that's, not only a worry for our marine mammals that we take care of, but also for people. About 1 billion people in the world still rely on seafood as their main source of protein. So it's important that we protect the seafood that we love and responsibly manage those fisheries and make responsible choices. So one thing you can do, we talked about it earlier, is use Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Guide to inform yourself on, what are sustainable seafood options in your areas. If there's, locations of the type of seafood that you eat that are better to choose from. You can also look for these blue MSC labels, the Certified Sustainable Seafood. That makes it really easy when you're shopping. I just look for that blue label on cans to choose sustainable seafood. And then one cool thing you can also do is support local fisheries. Usually, fishing done at a local level is a lot more sustainable. It's better for the environment. Um, and localcatch.org is a great website to go to, and will show you to community supported fisheries. So really similar to community supported agriculture. Those programs allow you to get a box of freshly caught seafood, and it changes depending on what the catch was that day. And it's a great way to try different types of seafood and support your local fisheries. And with that, I wanted to thank you for listening today, everyone. It was a pleasure. This was such a fun one to do, and it actually made me pretty hungry. I want sushi now. Um, and we also want to invite you all to come to the next Marine Mammal Monday in December, the last one of 2021. And this one will be all about seal and sea lion superstars. So we'll talk about some of the patients we've seen this past year and how we were able to rehabilitate them and send them back out to their ocean home just in time for the holidays.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Diane. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll stick around for a second to see if there are any other questions that pop up here. But just again, a huge thank you. Hope that you have wonderful celebrations later this month for Thanksgiving. And again, wanted to thank our contributing sponsor, Pet Emergency and Specialty Center of Marin, for sponsoring today's Marine Mammal Monday. Thank you so much. And hope you all have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.